While the Obama administration is not the root cause of the ominous dangers that face this country at home and abroad, it is the embodiment, the personification, and the culmination of dangerous trends that began decades ago. How does the President of the United States embody dangerous trends? How do you see this man?
Oh my gosh. I see him as someone who all his life has been associated with and part of a group of people who fundamentally don't believe in the principles of this country. Not only people, the most obvious example obviously is Jeremiah Wright, people like Bill Ayers, whom he's tried to disavow, but people who fundamentally think that we're on the wrong track, we have the wrong principles, and we need to be changed, whether we want to be or not.
Let's turn to Doug Levader now with the very latest on these West Coast protests. Hi, Doug.
Good morning. The president is warning California officials not to stand in the way of law and order as the demonstrations and riots in the Los Angeles area are entering their fourth day now. President Trump has superseded California Governor Gavin Newsom, calling in hundreds of National Guard troops to back up law enforcement agencies. LA's police chief said his officers were being pelted with everything from fireworks to cinder blocks.
We are overwhelmed as far as the number of people out there engaged in this type of activity and the type of things that they're doing. They'll take backpacks, and the backpack will have a cinder block in it. They have a hammer, and they'll break up the cinder block and use that, pass it around to throw at officers. There's no limit to what they're doing to our officers.
Civilization is not an inheritance that endures without effort. It is a fragile achievement, sustained only by the resolute enforcement of law and the moral courage of those entrusted to uphold it. When elected officials, those tasked with the stewardship of order, side with the lawless, they do not merely fail in their duties, they betray the very foundation of society itself. The riots in Los Angeles, sparked by the lawful arrest of convicted illegal immigrants and met with the deployment of 2,000 National Guard troops by President Trump, are not an isolated event. They are a symptom of a deeper malaise, a collapse of institutional responsibility that began not in the streets of California, but in the seminar rooms and press conferences of a decade ago. The question before us is not whether one agrees with the president's actions, but whether we still possess the will to defend the rule of law, or whether we will allow it to be supplanted by the rule of narrative. Let us begin with the historical lens, for no crisis emerges without precedent. The seeds of today's lawlessness were sown during the Obama administration, a period marked by a subtle but profound shift in the rhetoric and priorities of governance. President Obama, a man of considerable oratorical gifts, often spoke of activism as a moral imperative, casting suspicion on the institutions of law enforcement while romanticizing the energy of street protest. This was not a mere rhetorical flourish, it was a signal, one that reverberated through the halls of power and into the public square. As I observed in Dismantling America, the vision of the anointed, those who believe their moral intentions outweigh tangible consequences, began to reshape the priorities of governance. During those years, we witnessed a growing reluctance to enforce the law with clarity and consistency. Police departments tasked with maintaining public safety were increasingly portrayed as oppressors, while those who violated the law were recast as victims of systemic injustice. What is the function of law if its enforcers are vilified and its violators celebrated? This question, which should have been rhetorical, became a policy stance. The Obama administration's rhetoric emboldened a generation of activists who saw lawlessness not as a threat to society, but as a form of moral expression. From Ferguson to Baltimore, we saw the consequences. Riots met with equivocation, property destroyed, lives disrupted, and a growing sense that the rules no longer applied to those who shouted the loudest. The elite class, politicians, academics, and media figures embraced this vision, not because it produced better outcomes, but because it aligned with their self-image as moral arbiters. This was the beginning of a cultural shift, one that prioritized sentiment over results and narrative over reality. This brings us to the present moment. where the continuity of that shift is unmistakable. The Democratic leaders of California, Governor Gavin Newsom, Representative Maxine Waters, Mayor Karen Bass, have not merely inherited this legacy, they have amplified it. Their response to the Los Angeles riots reveals a pattern of political culpability that is as predictable as it is alarming. When Immigration and Customs Enforcement, acting within this lawful mandate, arrested convicted illegal immigrants, individuals whose presence in the country was itself a violation of federal law, the response was not gratitude for the restoration of order, but outrage. Rioters, armed with cinder blocks and fireworks, attacked police officers, set fire to public property, and disrupted the lives of law-abiding citizens. And yet, rather than condemn this violence unequivocally, California's leaders chose a different path. Governor Newsom, in a press conference that can only be described as a masterclass in moral posturing, called President Trump a dictator for deploying the National Guard under the authority of Title 10, United States Code Section 12,406. Representative Waters, never one to shy away from inflammatory rhetoric, suggested that the rioters' actions were a response to systemic oppression, as though throwing explosives at law enforcement were a legitimate form of political discourse. Mayor Bass, meanwhile, offered tepid calls for calm while failing to articulate a single actionable plan to restore order in her city. This is not leadership, it is abdication. It is the refusal to confront the reality that lawlessness, left unchecked, begets more lawlessness. The degeneration of law and order often begins not on the streets, but in the seminar rooms and the press conferences. What we are witnessing in Los Angeles is not a spontaneous outburst of public frustration. It is the predictable outcome of a decade-long experiment in moral exhibitionism. Democratic leaders, particularly in urban centers like Los Angeles, have consistently undermined the institutions charged with maintaining order. They have vilified ICE for enforcing immigration laws, demonized police for doing their jobs, and signaled solidarity with those who break the law, either through silence or through carefully crafted equivocations wrapped in the language of justice. This is not a neutral stance. To refuse to defend the law is to enable those who defy it. Let us examine the events in Los Angeles with clarity. The riots began in response to ICE's arrests of individuals who were not merely undocumented, but had been convicted of serious crimes, crimes that in a functioning society would demand accountability. The rioters' actions, attacking police, destroying property, and endangering lives, were not a cry for reform, but an assault on the very concept of law. President Trump's decision to deploy 2,000 National Guard troops was not an overreach. It was a recognition that local authorities had either failed or refused to act. The law is not a suggestion, it is a necessity. And when a city's leaders lack the will to enforce it, the federal government has not only the right, but the obligation to intervene. This is not the first time we have seen such a failure. The Black Lives Matter riots of 2020, which swept through cities like Minneapolis, Portland, and Seattle, set a precedent that has yet to be undone. In those cities, Democratic leaders responded not with resolve, but with retreat. Police budgets were slashed in New York, leading to a surge in violent crime that persists to this day. Portland became a synonym for lawlessness, with protests stretching into months while city officials dithered. Chicago, under successive Democratic administrations, has seen organized crime flourish while police morale plummets. In each case, the pattern is the same. Ideology trumps responsibility, and the consequences are borne not by the elites who champion these policies, but by the ordinary citizens who must live with their results. As I have said before, consequences matter more than rhetoric. And the consequences of this approach are measured in lives lost, businesses destroyed, and communities fractured. The root of this crisis lies not in the actions of rioters, but in the hubris of those who enable them. The political elite Men and women like Newsom, Waters, and Bass suffer from what I have called the vision of the anointed. They believe that their moral posturing, their carefully curated displays of compassion, absolve them of the duty to govern. They care more about the symbolism of their words than the safety of their constituents. They value the appearance of virtue over the reality of competence. And in doing so, they treat law-abiding citizens, those who pay taxes, obey the law, and sustain the social order, as obstacles to their grand narrative of social justice. Meanwhile, those who burn, loot, and destroy are excused as expressions of legitimate anger. This is not governance, it is surrender. We are not witnessing a crisis of crime, we are witnessing a crisis of leadership. The refusal to enforce the law is not a passive act, it is an active choice, one that signals to the lawless that their actions will face no meaningful consequences. When a governor calls the president a dictator for restoring order, he is not defending democracy, he is undermining it. When a congresswoman frames rioters as victims, she is not advancing justice, she is excusing violence. And when a mayor fails to articulate a plan to protect her city, she is not leading, she is abdicating. Those who are too refined to defend civilization will not remain refined for long. This brings us to a broader question. Can a republic survive when its leaders refuse to uphold the basic order upon which it depends? History offers little comfort on this point. Civilizations do not collapse because of external threats alone. They fall when those entrusted with their preservation lose the will to defend them. The Roman Republic did not crumble because of barbarian invasions. It crumbled because its leaders prioritized personal ambition over public duty. The Weimar Republic did not fail because of economic hardship alone. It failed because its elites lacked the courage to confront chaos. And today we stand at a similar crossroads. The American Republic, for all its resilience, cannot endure a sustained assault on the rule of law, not from rioters, but from those who enable them under the guise of compassion. The events in Los Angeles are a warning, not an anomaly. They reflect a deeper truth about the state of our political culture. Too many of our leaders are more concerned with protecting their image than protecting their citizens. They speak of justice while excusing injustice. They champion reform while ignoring the consequences of their rhetoric. And they vilify those who seek to restore order while offering no alternative but chaos. This is not a partisan issue. It is a civilizational one. The choice is not between Trump and Newsom, nor between Republican and Democrat. It is between those who believe that law and order are the foundation of a free society and those who believe that lawlessness can be tamed with platitudes. What then is to be done? The answer lies not in new policies or grand gestures, but in a return to first principles. Leadership requires the courage to enforce the law, even when it is unpopular. It demands the clarity to distinguish between protest and violence, between reform and destruction, and it requires the humility to recognize that good intentions are no substitute for good outcomes. The American people do not need leaders who pander to their emotions. They need leaders who protect their lives, their property, and their right to live in a society governed by law. Let me conclude with a sobering reflection. History is not kind to civilizations that lose the will to defend themselves, and even less kind to those who elect leaders who side with their enemies. The riots in Los Angeles and the response of California's leaders are a microcosm of a larger struggle. If we continue down this path, if we allow the rule of narrative to supplant the rule of law, we will not only lose our cities, but our republic. The choice is ours, but the consequences will be history's to judge.